So hi, Dr. Carolyn Griffin. It's nice to have you here and talk about fermentation again. I know I did a Facebook Live with you probably nearly a year ago on, so if people know about my office, you can probably find the video from way back when on the Vital Chiropractic page on Facebook. But I wanted to do a podcast with you too because I use fermented foods. I use kombucha a lot, and then I try to do some things like ferment my own carrots and onions and things like that, little things, and add those to my diet. But a lot of people don't know what fermented foods are, how easy they can be to make, and some people are really afraid of fermented foods. So let's back up a little bit, and if you want to just say hi and tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get started on that topic.
Sure. So I am Dr. Carolyn Griffin. I am a chiropractor. I am a certified fermentationist, and I love educating our patients and my community on fermented foods and what they can do to improve their gut health, which we are now finding is the leading cause or the root cause of a lot of disease in the world these days. And so by getting you to be healthier in that regard, obviously chiropractic, getting your adjustment, taking care of your nervous system, but realizing that your brain and your gut communicate and talk to each other by working on both aspects, you can really, really help to improve one's health or your patient's health that much more. So I got into fermentation kind of a little bit by accident. Years ago, we're talking probably a decade ago, I had a good friend who was a raw foodist come to my home, and we had a raw food party in the kitchen, she called it. And I invited a lot of friends over, and she was showing us how to uncook food and all of this good stuff. And one of the things that she mentioned was this word kefir. And I was like, so baffled. I was like, never heard of it. What's kefir? And she gave me an answer, but it like didn't register. I still didn't understand. And even though I asked like twice, I was like, I'm not going to ask again. Like I just didn't understand. And so I just let that go. And fast forward, many years later, it's been a few years now. And one of my friends and / patients came in and she goes, guess what I'm doing? And I'm like, what are you doing? She goes, I'm making kefir. I'm like, there's that word again. Like, tell me really, what is this? And she explained it in a way, maybe I finally just understood. And I was like, this is great. And I said, I want to do that too. So she opened the door for me. I just stepped in and I just kind of went nuts with it, so to speak. And I started making my own kefir. I started making kombucha, fermented foods. And that evolved into learning and understanding the value of how you can use these foods to actually heal your gut. And so I've actually been working on a gut health course, the 5 R's of healing leaky gut, in order to help people get better. Because on this journey of me doing a lot of this fermentation, I've learned that there are so many people suffering with a lot of different conditions that can actually be helped by healing themselves. Obviously with chiropractic, but also with fermented foods and the things you need to do that lead up to the things you need to do first before you ingest the fermented foods. But so that's what I've been working on. So it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. I mean, so let's go back and tell people, like, what are some of the things that can be helped with fermented foods and correcting your neurology and your gut brain axis? Like, what are some of the things that people are experiencing now that can really be helped with this?
So leaky gut, that can be triggered by inflammatory foods and toxins and things of that nature. So the cell wall, it's only one cell. I should say the intestinal wall is only one cell thick. And so it can be damaged pretty easily, especially with today's diet. So gluten, antibiotics, genetically modified foods, any and all of the above, which if, that's like one category, lots of stuff, right? So there's many things that can affect your gut. And when that happens and that gut wall is weak or it's leaking, then it can get into the bloodstream and it can lead to all kinds of problems. Candida, SIBO, gastritis, irritable bowel, those types of things. And so by going after that and healing that and going after the root cause, then you're going to be able to help different people with a lot of different conditions. Because we now know that 70% of your immune system is in your gut. 90% of disease stems from it. So by healing that, you're going to get a lot more people healthy.
Yeah, and there's so much bacteria, good, healthy bacteria, that we always thought that bacteria was bad, or a lot of people thought that in the past. We had to get rid of all bacteria. Now we realize that we have this plethora of good, beneficial bacteria, and when we're doing some of these things with our diet and medications, we're wiping out the good guys and the bad guys, right?
Exactly.
So doing fermented foods is a great way to restore those good, healthy bacteria in your gut as well.
Exactly. The name of the game, or the key, is truly diversity. And when you have the diversity, not even just the number of bacteria, but the diversity of the different types or strains of bacteria, that's when you're actually going to start to see a shift and a change in one's health. And so, yeah, how can you get different strains? That's when let's talk about that fermentation then, because that's kind of like a nice little segue to go right into it. Kefir is one of the best things that you can do. And I want to preface this by saying, don't just go out there and start drinking kefir thinking, okay, maybe I've got gut issues. Maybe this is what I need to do. You should really test and assess and then retest and really know what is going on with a person. Because one of the things I do want to say is, if you have something like SIBO, which is the small intestine bacterial overgrowth, that's what it stands for. By eating or ingesting fermented foods, you can actually flare up those symptoms. And people that are, have what they feel are gut issues, and they end up eating or drinking fermented foods and they feel worse, that might be something that you have. You might have candida, you might have SIBO, and those are things that you might want to clear your system before you start to add in fermented foods. So there's actual process, and that's why I was going to say with the gut health course, the 5 R's, there is a rhyme and a reason and an order that it actually should go in. But let's have fun, and let's just talk about what's good and with kefir right now. What I love about it is it has tons of strains of bacteria. So a lot of people are like, what is it? So I'll just go into what it is first, because I was like, what's that? It's a fermented milk. So basically, milk that has had kefir grains, it ferments, it turns, the kefir grains eat all of the lactose or the milk sugars, and it turns it to like the lactic acid. It basically ferments it, and it can basically sit on your countertop for a long time and not spoil because of that, because it's more of an acidic environment. And a lot of bad bacteria or botulism, it can't survive in an acidic environment. So what's good about it is this. It's like a drinkable yogurt as far as its consistency. So a lot of people compare kefir to yogurt. And what's good about yogurt is what we always know, that if you're taking antibiotics, you should drink you should eat yogurt as well, because it's going to help with your gut, right? We've heard that before. But if you look at the differences between kefir and yogurt has 7 to 10 different strains of bacteria, where kefir has 30 to 50. And so there's a wide range of diversity in the number of different strains of bacteria that you can have, which is going to actually help to replenish and colonize your gut much quicker and better, honestly. So that's one of the things that I just love, and I would always steer people toward. It's the easiest thing to make. It's the simplest thing to make. And so that's where I usually start folks when they want to start fermenting.
Oh, do you know much about kefir water?
I do. So kefir, it doesn't have as many strains of bacteria. It has more than yogurt still, but it's on the lower side. Personally, I started making it. I personally don't like the taste of it. It tastes like beer to me. And I've even flavored it with a bunch of different types of fruits and things of that nature. And I just can't get past it. Like, I'm not a beer drinker. I don't care for the taste. And so for me, it's like, if I'm going to make it, I want to enjoy it. So for some that definitely don't want any dairy at all, that is a good option. So that is something they can do for sure.
Yeah, and you can use different, you can use coconut milk. You can use some different milks with kefir as well. That's not a dairy product.
For sure. But the key is that the kefir grains still feed on lactose. Yeah. So if you're going with the nut milk, then you need to refeed those grains still with cow's milk or sheep or goat's milk eventually.
Okay.
After every few batches.
So, and what are some other common fermentations that are good that people can use or start to do with themselves?
Sure. kombucha, like you mentioned that you enjoy kombucha and you make that for your family. That is something that I love and enjoy as well. What's great about kombucha is that it has this yeast, Saccharomyces boulardii. It's actually resistant to antibiotics. So there is, if you have to take antibiotics, which unfortunately a lot of folks do that, even if they try to avoid it, stuff happens. And one of the probiotics that is given to a person that is taking an antibiotic is Fluorostor. That is the hospital brand, or the name brand that is given to a patient in a hospital setting. So Fluorostor is actually S. boulardii, which is the yeast found in kombucha. So one of the things that I do recommend for folks is if they are having to take antibiotics or do a course of it, if you're drinking kefir and things of that nature, that bacteria will be wiped out along with all the bad bacteria. So you're just kind of like wasting your time in a sense, but you can absolutely drink kombucha, and that's one of the things that you can get in your system that is resistant to antibiotics.
Yeah, and Saccharomyces boulardii is one of those things too that helps. If I'm remembering this all correctly, it can kill off yeast too. So sometimes people can drink kombucha or take SACB and actually have yeast die off and have more symptoms from that. So you kind of have to be careful if you have a yeast overgrowth, which a lot of people tend to have if they have dysbiosis, right?
Yes. So when you're doing, absolutely, that's the other thing. It's like the same type of situation with SIBO. Like you want to make sure that you're clear before you start loading in. That is, so in the 5 R's, I say you need to remove, you need to repair, then revitalize, renovate, and then you're going to restore, or you're going to rebuild your gut. The rebuild is when you add in the fermented foods. There's a lot to do beforehand in order to get your body ready for all of that. So if you are having those symptoms, or be it from a good bacteria or a yeast, and then you might have an overgrowth of some sort and your body's not going to respond well if you're adding in more. You need to actually eliminate, clear out the system before you add it back in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't understand that, because I have had people who have added fermented foods to their diet, but they haven't done the steps before to prepare their body for it, and they've come back and felt awful and felt more sick. And so, yeah, that's a really, really important point that most people, I think, are missing.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. So are there some, for people who don't have severe symptoms and they're going to just start adding some fermented foods to their diet and maybe reducing, gluten and all the junk that we tend to eat? Because there was a article I was just reading that immigrants who come to our country, their gut biome gets altered within 6 to 9 months of coming to our country, and it's been correlated with obesity rates and more symptoms of ill health and things like that. So our country, just our diet alone in our country, is so much different than many other countries that are still eating foods that are whole foods and real food and foods with fermented foods in their diet, and then they come to our country. So we have to really look at our diet to start with.
I agree. There's one other part to that I think is another factor is actually lifestyle. Right. So we tend to be overly clean in America, and in third world countries, they actually have more of a diverse microbiome than we do here in the United States. We don't carry there, they don't carry around hand sanitizer and other things like that, or Clorox or Lysol, everything. They just live, right? They live in the environment they live in. There's dirt, there's bugs, there's all kinds of stuff. And I think, we need to get back to getting our hands dirty in the garden and let our kids play with mud pies and not just sitting inside playing the Xbox. Like, there is a lifestyle difference. And I think the bottom line, is basically respect Mother Nature. Like, all of these things exist for a reason. And it all comes down to, the basics, like dirt. Dirt is good for you, and getting dirt under your nails and not, worrying about, I touched a dog, let me hand sanitize that. There's the 3Ds, dirt, dust, and dander, are actually one of the things that can actually make us healthier, especially our children. And, I talked about, when I was pregnant with my son, I remember one of my girlfriends was pregnant at the same time, and we were going to be having our babies. And I just remember her saying, "Oh, we need to get rid of our dog. You should get rid of your cat," that kind of situation. And I'm like, no, actually, we're going to keep the cat. And but she wanted to create this sterile environment for her child because she didn't want the baby to get allergies. And we now know that being exposed to these things at a young age can actually ward off or prevent symptoms or having allergies as they get older. So yeah, having a sterile environment is actually not a good thing. Just like how our microbiome is developed. It is developed from it starts from us moving through our mother's birth canal. In actuality, it actually starts in the placenta. More research is out. It used to be that in the womb, the baby was sterile, but now they know that there is bacteria that is going through the umbilical cord. But as the baby moves through the birth canal, that's when the baby is exposed to mom's bacteria. And that's when the gut lining is actually starting to be developed and develop much faster, mature, I should say, much faster. And so by going through that and doing all of that, the baby is able to become healthier as a result. So, but what ends up happening is C-sections are very common. What is the rate? Is it like 33% of women are having babies via C-section as opposed to naturally a vaginal birth? And as a result of that, these children, and then they're being bottle fed instead of breastfed. So there's many factors of how the microbiome on a child is diminished. The number of bacteria is diminished, and that's leading to illness and sickness. So yeah. You're right.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've had some of these discussions with my Facebook group, and yeah, it all starts with, well, pregnancy. It starts with mom's health and their pregnancy, and it goes on from there, and all these little interventions, all these little things here and there, which can be big things or little things, sure, just send you on a different path. So
yep, exactly.
Are there certain things that in fermented foods that, like, say children shouldn't eat or pregnant women shouldn't have, or because I know some people say there's a little bit of alcohol content and things like that. So what do you say about that?
I always like to err on the side of caution when it comes to pregnancy and breastfeeding. I would say kombucha doesn't have to be your first choice. There's a lot of other options as far as drinking and eating fermented foods. It doesn't have to be, oh, I can't have kombucha, I guess it's all out the window. When it comes to kombucha, you're either because of the way it ferments, you're either going to be putting on a nutritional label or an alcohol warning label. Like, it could go either way. And so I would prefer a woman just drink kefir, water kefir, eat fermented foods, go ahead with the raw sauerkraut. You mentioned carrots to me earlier. I love spicy carrots, that kind of stuff. So you can still get all that good stuff in and during the pregnancy, I would just say stay away from kombucha. And for other people that have gut issues, kombucha isn't the first thing you want to take. I mean, it's high in histamine. There are people that can have reactions to that as well. And so I would say, and there's a possibility of the higher sugar content that's in it as well. So if a person is not sure, then I would say, maybe not go the kombucha route, but go the others. There's so many other options that a person can have.
Yeah, and when I started making my own fermented foods, like the carrots, it is so easy to make carrots. So I'm going to have you explain to people how you make like a jar of fermented carrots.
Yeah, so people they're worried. They're like, isn't it rotten? Like, isn't it going to go bad sitting on the shelf like for days? And the answer is no. So there's a difference between fermentation and canning. So people think, I think we're just programmed now that anything that is not refrigerated, heated, or frozen is not good for you, right? So hence, go for the packaged stuff because that's safe. and go for the canned stuff because that seems safer. But there's a big difference between canning and fermentation. I don't know if most people realize when you can, you're putting in, sometimes they add in the vinegar. So that's the start of of how it can be have a higher shelf life. But then they stick that in hot boiling water for a period of time, and then they seal it. And that can sit on a countertop on a shelf for like years. That's the stuff you buy, your Vlasic pickles or your whatever. And that's the jarred stuff, the canned stuff that's like in the grocery stores. But what is the risk of that? what is that one bacteria that people are worried when you open up a can? Why don't you get that can that's dented? You leave that one on the shelf. What's that bug or bacteria that we worry about? It's botulism, right? And when we're worried about botulism, that can kill you. That is something that is a scary bacteria. But here's the thing with botulism. It cannot grow in an acidic environment. So what's interesting about fermentation is you cut up your carrots, whatever style you want them, French fries, you want them circles, whatever you want to do. I just chop them, whatever's the fastest is the way I do it. I chop them up, I stick them in the jar. I have my brine, which is basically salt water, and you fill it. And depending on if it's floating or not, you can put a glass weight in it, put on the cap, screw cap, but you have to have it breathe. So I have these, it's kind of like a nipple or like a bottle, like what a baby would suck on, right? It's one of those nipples. And so you would put one of those on, and that just allows air to escape, but nothing to come in. So it keeps the environment clean. And so I would just sit that on the countertop or shelf in the pantry is typically where I put it, because it's a darker area and the temperature is pretty room temp. And at that point, you can let it sit for 3 to 6 days. And what you're going to notice is it's going to start to ferment. The bacteria that is in the air, the bacteria that is on the vegetable is going to proliferate. It's going to continue to change, and it's going to turn that environment acidic. So it's going to be lactic acid is going to develop. And at that point, so it's lactofermentation. And at that point, you're going to see it bubble, and that gas is going to be released from the jar so it doesn't, explode. And that's why you want those gas release valves on it. And it's done. And then at that point, it's fermented. It preserves it in that state. Fermentation's nothing new. It's been around for thousands of years. It's just really, truly, in my opinion, making a comeback over the last few years. And it's one of the ways that our ancestors actually preserved food before there was refrigeration. And so it's an old school way of taking care of food and preserving it. And preserves, that's like, fruits that are rotting. You have a season, you take the fruit, you can ferment it, and it can save until the next season. That way you can have food throughout the year during the winter months, right? That's how people were able to survive and eat. And so that's how you do it. It's super simple.
Yeah, I think people don't realize that it's really just a brine of salt and water and your chopped up vegetables, and you just have to make sure that they can let that gas off.
Yep.
And you can eat them in like 5 days,
yep.
6 days later, and there's your fermented food.
That's it. And you can make it fun. You can add seasonings. You can add, I do serrano peppers and make them spicy, kind of like the spicy tomato carrots that you find in Mexican restaurants. That's like one of the things I go to, right? What is that one? It's like the Italian mix of cauliflower, celery, onion, carrots, hot pepper. And that's like that one mix that you would go in the store and buy, $5 for a small skinny jar of this stuff. And I make that myself, and it costs pennies on the dollar. It tastes better. It hasn't been canned. Therefore, it's got probiotics, which are good for you. And that's going back and circling back around. That is exactly why we're doing all of this, is so that we can have that diversity and improve our gut health, so that we can live longer and be healthier overall. Yeah.
How much do you recommend people add to their diets and fermented foods? Should they, like 5%, 10% of their diet, more or less?
So I say start slow, and because you don't know how your body's going to respond, and everyone comes in at a different level, right? Are you a clean eater generally, or have you been eating McDonald's 3 times a week and now you're like, I'm going to eat fermented foods? Where are you on that spectrum? I would always say be safer than sorry. And the reason why is because I don't want you running to the toilet immediately, because that will happen. And if it does happen, it's not a bad thing. Obviously better out than in, as we like to say. And clearly, some people need a detox in that way. I always would recommend start with kefir, 1/4 cup. Drink that for a week, see how your body responds, increase it to 1/2 cup. You're good to go on that. You can do 1/2 cup of kefir every day. Once you get your body used to it. Then I would say, in addition to, let's say you're going to have your lunch, have a little bit of raw sauerkraut. I would say 1 to 2 forksfuls a day. Start with that. See how your body responds. It's not one of these things where you're going to do a bowl and you're going to eat the whole thing. You want to do a little bit, and you can add a little bit of fermented foods to every one of your meals, depending on how many times you eat a day. Breakfast, I sometimes do eggs. I don't really eat breakfast. It's more like midday for me. I tend to not eat till 12 or 1 anyway, but I sometimes will eat eggs and sauerkraut and half an avocado as my first meal. And that's what I will have. So some stuff like that, or I might have spicy carrots with my eggs or whatever. It's just whatever I'm in the mood for. But I mean, there's options with things like that.
Yeah, you really don't need to add a whole lot to your diet to make a huge difference in how much you're bringing in as far as the good, healthy bacteria. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that too. I think they need to eat like a whole big bowl of something.
Yeah, and they don't. And they just need, kefir is a great way to start. Sauerkraut is another, and people think, ugh, sauerkraut, it's so disgusting. And honestly, I was not the biggest fan when I was a kid. And here's the deal, your taste buds change as you become an adult. You need to try things and just see how it tastes, because things change. I never used to like onions, mushrooms, or green peppers. Now I love onions and green peppers and things like that. Now I still don't care for mushrooms. I'm not a mushroom person. For me, it's texture. But other than that, I retried some of these things. So if your parents made you eat sauerkraut when you were a kid and you're like, it's repulsive, try again and try making it yourself. Because when you make it yourself and you see how easy, and you can make it taste however you want, you can add different seasonings to make it taste better. Sometimes I've made fermented beets. I've added a fresh basil leaf. And that is it in the jar. And now the beets just are vibrant with this flavor of, with this one basil leaf. I've made kefir, instead of adding fruits to it and having it as a morning beverage, I've turned it into salad dressing. So I've had it that way for, say, lunchtime. I've put in a couple cloves of garlic, either basil and or dill. That's a great base to a salad dressing, and then you can add whatever else you would like to it, or leave it as is. I've done just left it alone as is, thrown it over some lettuce, romaine lettuce, and other veggies, and it's good to go. So those are things that can be done, and I do, and it makes such a huge difference. You can add it in and make it simple.
Perfect. Well, that's so much information, which is good, because I think we simplified it for people and took some of the scare out of it, because I think people are scared of working with foods because they think they're rotting and they're going to get all this, like I said, botulism and that kind of stuff. And so I think, fermenting is not that hard. I am definitely not a chef. I can ask my husband. He gets a little worried when I start cooking out the dinner, and but I can do some fermented foods, and I do them pretty good, and they're really super easy to do. So I encourage everybody to just start with something simple. There's a bunch of books on how to ferment foods and different recipes if you really just need something to follow. I have a great one that's just a small little book, and it has tons of little recipes.
Love it. And if you want the how-tos, I actually have a website called My Cultured Life, and I share how to make kombucha, how to make kefir, how to make fermented sauerkraut and other fermented foods. And it gives you the how-tos. It gives you some basic recipes. It's a good place to start. If you're looking for kefir grains, like where do I get the kefir grains in order to even start to make kefir? I have them there on the site as well. So super simple and easy. It's a great way to do it. I had somebody randomly from Indiana buy some kefir grains like 3 days ago. And I just love the fact that the word is getting spread about how you can do this stuff yourself and not, spend a small fortune at the grocery store. Because, a small bag of sauerkraut, if you want raw fermented sauerkraut, is like $6 to $9. It's a lot of money. You can buy a head of cabbage for a couple of bucks, and you can have like a quart or two of sauerkraut that is so good for you and delicious. You can make it red, you can make it green, you can make it a combination, you can add in cauliflower, you can do whatever you want. There's so many options, and that's what I love, is the creativity that can come from this. And get your kids involved and show them what all of it is. I started a little later in life when my kids were older, so they're looking at the SCOBY from the kombucha like it's an alien. Like their friends would come over and get selfies with the alien. you know, that kind of fun, but we make it fun and educate. And, you know, my daughter forever was like, you're such a hippie. You're so hippie. And now she's like into it, you know, like her friends are like, oh, I want kombucha. Can your mom bottle me a few and give it to me? And so now it's like, cool. And so anyway, you can make it as fun as you want, get your children involved so they understand and educate them. And like the extra scobies, I literally just made fruit roll-ups and dog treats out of the extra scobies I had from my SCOBY hotel, which was just busting at the seams at that point. So, and it's fun. So there's a lot of things you can do with the leftovers, so to speak.
Yeah. So your website is myculturedlife.com, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'll put the link to that for people so they can go on there and get some ideas and get some kefir grains. I actually started my whole fermentation. I actually started with kefir when I started, and now I'm doing more kombucha and a little less kefir, but I need to get back into kefir. And I did kefir water.
Okay.
So I have to try kefir milk.
Yep.
I think I like that better.
Yep. And you can flavor it like the easiest way to start, especially if you're offering it to kids, or even if it's an adult palate that's not sure. Strawberries and I like to add a little bit of stevia and vanilla extract just for flavoring, and let that second ferment for a couple hours, 2 to 3. Put it in the fridge, and it's delicious. Like I've made it taste like peach cobbler, where I've done peaches with nutmeg and cinnamon and vanilla, and it's like delicious. You know what I mean? So there's so many ways that you can flavor it. That's what I love, is that creativity. So I've got some of the recipes up there. You can check it out. Lemon is a good one. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. Is there anything you want to let us know before we say goodbye?
I just respect Mother Nature. Know that dirt is good. Take care of your gut health. Check out my website, myculturedlife.com, and know that what's coming soon is the 5 bars of healing leaky gut, because I know that's a big folks, and there is a right way and a wrong way to heal it. And I've got that going. So definitely check that out when it arrives.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing, and hope everybody has a great day. Thanks, Carolyn. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.